So we are here with the voice of the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, Bob Rotruck. Bob, thanks so much for joining us today.
Charlie, thanks for having me. Good to talk to you.
Definitely. So, as I've been very honest about on this show, due to the fact that I cover the Philadelphia Flyers on a daily basis, I do not have time to watch the Lehigh Valley Phantoms very often. I try to get up there a couple times a year. Haven't had a chance to yet this year, but people will ask me how the prospects are doing, and I have to essentially depend upon the reports I hear from people in the organization and then people who actually are able to watch Phantoms games on a daily basis. And Bob obviously is as much of a Phantoms expert as you're going to get. So we wanted to have Bob on the show during this bye week to dive a little bit into the Phantoms, the team, the prospects, and just how things are going. About what, an hour, 90 minutes away by car, something like that.
It depends on when you're traveling. That's right. Yeah, an hour if you're going to come up at 1 in the morning or something. Probably longer than that if you're coming up in the afternoon.
Fair point. Fair point. So I guess I'll kick it off with more of a bigger picture question on the team as a whole.
Yeah.
So the Phantoms right now are seventh in the division after seemingly taking a step forward last season. Obviously, they made the playoffs. Ian Laperrière got a lot of praise within the organization for the work he did both with the prospects and in terms of the team playing well. I know they've lost some guys. Tyson Forrester's an NHL, an NHL player now. Anisimov isn't on the team anymore. Zamula is up there. Brink spent most of the second half of the year with the team. He's been with the Flyers most of the year. But I think the expectations were probably, at least from the outside, higher than how the team has performed thus far. So I'm curious as to, what's been happening there and why they maybe haven't lived up to preseason expectations.
I think it's fair to say that the expectations were higher inside as well. And I also think it's fair to wonder what is happening. The team is better than their record. And a lot of people say that, for their own teams and their own situations. I think it's very clear for Lehigh Valley. And you have a few different aspects here that you can look at for why the record is where it is. The defense is young, and that's been exposed sometimes. I think the goaltending has not performed up to expectations consistently enough. Sometimes Felix Sandstrom and Cal Peterson have been great. Other times they've let in a goal or two that maybe they probably should not have. And it's hard to win when your team save percentage is hovering around 885. We don't want to pin everything on the goaltending, but that does make a difference. And there have been times when the Phantoms have played some games where I feel like they've outperformed the opponent and you outshoot them 40-25, but they get a goaltender that stands on his head and you're just not buying a goal. And so some of it is a little bit of iffy luck going against them. It is frustrating because the team has been more or less relatively healthy. They have not been rated that much by the Flyers because when the Flyers get injuries, obviously that affects the Phantoms and
Sure.
Lehigh Valley is going to lose one of their top guys or more than one of the top guys. That happens to a lot of teams. It's happened a little bit more recently with a couple of recent injuries. Wade Allison's been out. Tanner Lazinski has been out. And Louis Belpedio, he might be out for a little longer also, and he's a big deal on defense. And now Garrett Wilson, the captain, is out at least for the short term. So now it's starting to pile up a little bit on Lehigh Valley, whereas before they kind of had too many players. But yeah, I think the feeling is, look, we're playing well, and then we make one really bad mistake in there, shoot ourselves in the foot. It costs us a game in close games, or you're going to play a lot of one-goal games. Those types of mistakes are critical. And after the Saturday game, the Phantoms were down in that game 3-1, rallied to tie it in the third on goals for Brink and Allison in his first game back. Had a chance to win. They lost in a shootout, so that was, that's kind of a coin flip when you get to a shootout. And Wade Allison in the postgame actually, I think, put it best. And he said, look, if we just stop shooting ourselves in the foot, we've got a really good team here. And I think everyone believes that. And what I can tell and what Lappy has also said many times is, look, we're still, and the players too, we're still tight in the room, and they feel like they still have that chemistry. And I think they know what they have, even if the results have been a little bit shorter of what they've been hoping that they would be by this point right now.
Gotcha. Okay. So I guess the hope would be, assuming that some of these injuries don't linger that they're dealing with now, that they'll have a much stronger second half than first half.
I think that they're banking on it. Yes, I think so. I certainly believe that too. Definitely need some better goaltending in key moments though as well. That's just definitely a thing.
Gotcha. I guess now we'll move into the individual prospects. I know this is where, a lot of Flyers fans are more focused on. They'd like to see the Phantoms win, but they care much more about the names they know and how they're performing. So I guess aside from Bobby Brink, who obviously just was sent down, he spent most of the year with the Flyers, Samu Tuomaala is probably the top prospect on this roster. What I really liked about him, watching him at development camp in Voorhees this summer, and then at main camp, also in Voorhees moving into the fall, it was the way he was playing with a style of play that to me seemed very translatable to the North American pro game. It was a fast-paced style. He was getting in on the forecheck. He was actually being pretty chippy for his size. It just looked like the kind of style where you watched him and you said, yeah, that's a really good NHL middle sixer. Obviously, his production's been strong this year with the Phantoms, but has that style continued throughout the season for Samu?
Yes, and you talk about his size, and he doesn't come off as the biggest guy there. I can stand right next to him. I'm 5'6.5". I'm not a big guy, and he's not exactly towering over me. But then you look at him; he's winning board battles. He goes in there and gets his nose dirty some. I don't want him at the net front too much to get killed in there, but sometimes he can do that too. But he wins board battles. And, I've talked with Lappy about it, and also our assistant coach, John Snowden, because he's had a couple of assists where he's digging it away and setting up Lexell or whoever for a really nice goal. And I'm like, well, look at the assist that Samu had. That's not like a pretty 2-on-1 sauce across or anything like that. That's digging it away against some strong guys. And John Snowden, our assistant coach, had pointed out to me, don't underestimate how strong Samu is. His legs, are like Kapanen back in the day as well. There's that similarity there.
Right.
Samu is not as wide, but his legs, man, he's built like a tank from the waist below. Even if he looks like he's a little scrawny up top, he just turned 21 years old. So he's still a kid. Now, I will say though, and Samu knows this, and Lappy has referenced it as well. Okay, the point production is there. Sometimes there's some really good plays. It's consistency, though. And he even had a talk with a couple of guys, including Ollie Lexell the previous weekend. We were in Cleveland 2 weekends ago and had a loss on Friday. And he said, I talked with some guys about, not taking shifts off and really pushing. And when you're away from the puck and playing harder. And that's something that they've talked about with Ollie before. Coaching's a lot of repeating your own words over and over, but I got the impression that was about Lexell and also about Samu Tuomaala. And sometimes he gets a goal and it's great, but he knows, and he's said it before, like, hey, the last few games I really don't think I've been playing all that well, which is probably a good thing. Maybe he's a little bit of a perfectionist, as a lot of players are, but I know that all the Philly fans get so excited when he scores a goal and bring him up. I see that stuff on Twitter and so forth too. He's not there yet. He's going to get there, but he has still work to be done in a lot of that off the puck stuff. Now it's with a different line as well, because Tanner Lazinski is out, and Ollie Lexell is up. That was the combo for a little while. Now he's with Rhett Gardner, who is a really nice stabilizing force there. Then you put Brink and Tuomaala on that line together, and they're just zipping around. I don't buy it that Brink is that slow. He looked pretty darn fast to me, or fast enough anyway, to really kind of dominate the games last weekend. So watching that line try to develop some chemistry for however long Bobby Brink is going to be here with us is really exciting too. By the way, when I was talking about what Lappy had told me after the Friday game, Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago, first shift of the game, Ollie Lexell is flying in there and blasts some guy in the forecheck. And I go, okay, now and he doesn't do a lot of that. That's what Lappy's talking about. And then literally 2-3 days later, Ollie's going up. I mean, they notice these things, and it is important. And that you hear that talk all the time. Hey, it's why Bobby Brink came back down to us in the first place as well. Torts was saying, okay, yeah, sometimes he can produce. What else are you doing? Everything else needs work. And there was also, and I'm getting off on a tangent here, but there was a goal in our game this past Saturday. And I think it was Andre Tuamala actually cut across on the power play, I think. Maybe not. It wasn't power play. It was high slot, and he takes a shot, rebound off a goalie, and Brink is there to put it in, getting his nose dirty, getting a greasy goal. Okay, we know he can score some of those skill goals, but getting in there and doing that, is that not what Torts was exactly talking about with Bobby Brink? I don't know how much he's getting it into the net front in Philadelphia. I don't get to watch the Flyers games as much, just like you don't get to watch the Phantoms games. But looking at that goal that Brink had, I'm like, well, maybe that's even more important than some of the really pretty goals and the powerful snipes that we see when he gets in there and gets a dirty, greasy goal like that one. That might actually be more important and more attention grabbing to Danny Briere, who was there at the game on Saturday, came up from Philadelphia to see that one, as did a lot of Flyers officials. I feel like that's really important for Bobby Brink as well.
Gotcha. So going back, and I'll get to Brink in a second, but
Going back
to Tuamala, do you get the sense, because he's obviously had a very weird trajectory since being drafted. He bounced around. He spent a little bit of time in the minors right after being drafted, then went back overseas, couldn't really find his spot. Do you get the sense that because of his odd path to get to this point, that even though he's playing well, that maybe they want him to have a full stabilizing season and not rush him up to the NHL as quickly as possible?
Well, I think so, but I wouldn't be surprised if, they dangled a carrot for him and gave him that reward at the end of the year too.
Got it.
Because he deserves it. The fact of the matter is, he's a big surprise to everyone. And Lappy has said that many times, and I said it right from the very beginning. We had him here 2 years ago for a little over a month, and he's flying around in the preseason games. That's not really the same, a Phantoms preseason game with a lot of ECHL guys. He played 2 games for the Phantoms, and he was completely lost out there. All over the place, had no idea where to go. Stayed with us a couple more weeks, practices, trying to get it. The guy could barely speak English then. It wasn't happening. He wasn't ready to get into the lineup. He just wasn't close. And then after, and I'm reading, it goes down to Mestis League in Finland and all of that. Right. And and his numbers were not exactly through the roof in Finland. So when Tuamala's coming back this year at 20 years old, okay, he's fast. He's got a great shot. He has some skill set there. But what I saw from him 2 years ago, I didn't think he was going to be ready for this. I thought it was going to be some real growing pains. And there are some, but he has been, because of his English, which he has worked on so well, now he can do a full interview. And I know you saw him in Voorhees, back at rookie camp and all of that. I can talk with him for 5-10 minutes and he's fine. He can do it, which is amazing compared to where he was 2 years ago, where he could say hi, and that was about it. And obviously that's huge for him to be able to understand what the coaches are talking about as well, and to get to get on that page and understand everything that's happening with conversations with his teammates too. He is so much better for this first half of the season, with still some kinks to work out, but he is so much better than I think any of us expected him to be. I would assume that probably Danny Briere was there as well. Like, we didn't know what we were going to have out of him, and there's going to be some real growing pains. And it's like, wow, Samu's doing okay. And now here he is, the second highest scoring rookie in the entire AHL. Like, he's been that good when he's on top of his game. But referring to him as having, being surprisingly good this year, I think that's fair. 20 years old, didn't have great numbers in Finland, was bouncing around, couldn't find his stride. Now coming back to the North American game, where he wasn't exactly doing great when we had him 2 years ago, he looks so good. But yes, to your original point, I for a variety of reasons, also because he's not there yet, right, I don't think they're going to rush him and find a spot for him in the NHL. He needs to continue here, and he still has work on his game to improve. If he goes up there, it's going to be, sort of similar in some ways to Bobby Brink in John Tortorella's eyes all over again. Like, okay, yeah, you're doing some things right. Everything else, you need to work on this and send him back. There's no point in bringing him up, except for maybe a taste as kind of a reward, which I do think could happen. I'm just projecting there.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense, and that's kind of where my head was at with him as well. Maybe he gets a cup of coffee at the end as just a
Right.
Pat on the back, preparing. Give the guy a chance to see what it's like, so he knows what to work on over the summer, and then try to make the big push at next camp to maybe try to make the team out of training camp.
There were some really simple things as well at the beginning of the season that he has refined. They put him in the slot, in the bumper position on the power play. And he's kind of rotated over, sometimes over on his one-timer side on the left circle. But he would take it and he would just hammer away as hard as he could on any one-timer. Had to have a really quick release. I think he's panicking because it's North American game. You have no time. And he's missing the goal by 2 yards, and it's just coming around the boards and coming out. And he's not even close. And that there was no point to that. And I'm like, I think that he might as well be closing his eyes and shooting it. And Lappy has talked with him, and I think others have as well. Just settle down. You don't have to shoot it as hard as you humanly can. You can shoot it at 90%, and you still have a crazy wicked shot. But if you get it to a corner and actually get it on net, you're giving yourself a chance. And that's when he started to get some goals and getting them to go in. I talked with him about that with Lappy as well. I think everyone's on the same page. He was overshooting before and just missing the net by so much. It was just ridiculous. So that's where and so sometimes it would accidentally be on target and go in. That's kind of where he was in early November. Like, let's kind of settle down here. And it's really simple, basic things. And remember, he just turned 21. He's still a kid,
right?
And there's so much time for him. And I see him making strides, and then maybe, some steps back one week after another. He's going to get there, but he's not there yet. But the point production is indeed, the Flyers fans are correct to be excited about him, I think.
Gotcha. So moving on to Bobby Brink, who you talked about briefly, in the conversation about Tuamala.
Yeah.
Obviously since he's been sent down, he's been scoring. He's got the 3 goals in 2 games. But do you get the sense, because I expect a guy who can hold his own at the NHL level is probably going to put up points at the AHL level. Do you get the sense that he's approaching this demotion with the right attitude? Because I know for the Flyers, that's just as important as whether he's putting up points, is if he's responding well and he's not sulking, that he's trying to work on the things they want him to work on down there.
Well, for the most part, those guys try to hold that stuff from me.
Fair.
And sometimes you can tell the guy is pouting. I mean, Morgan Frost back in the day had a real heart-to-heart with me. He was frustrated. Why am I getting sent down? And, some guys will talk and some guys won't. But I do think so. I think he has the right approach. I think he wants to play, and obviously he hadn't for the last 3 games with Philadelphia. But your previous point that, hey, when guys go down, yeah, of course they're going to score. I don't know if that's correct, though. I didn't know what to expect out of Bobby. He looks a lot better than he did when we had him last year. When he had some ups and downs, he was coming off the hip surgery.
Right.
A back-to-back for Bobby. That second game, he was slow. And I think he was pushing through it some. He looks a ton better now than he did with us last year, which I was hoping for. But there's a lot of guys that talk about how different the AHL is because it's a more chaotic game. There's less flow. Passes maybe aren't quite as on the tape as much and some guys. Tyson Forster, I think, will talk about this, maybe Cam York too. They'll talk about how it's actually an easier game in some ways at the NHL level, which, obviously that feels contradictory to what you would expect. But I've heard so many guys say that. It doesn't make sense at first, but you have to stop and think about it from their perspective. And you're playing with better players that are putting it right on your tape on really smooth ice to set you up for, Forster on the rush to score the 2 goals that he did against Boston and so forth. So I didn't know if Bobby was going to really pop off the page when he came back. And then it was like, oh, wow. Oh, my God. And the first game, he only had 1 goal. It could have been 4. It's just developing chances all over the place, which is great. I don't know if that's enough to get him back to the NHL level, but everything else that he's doing as well. And he's just so creative with the puck. Lappy and Wade Allison also in his postgame, they talked about, Bobby's not going to be here for long. He has no business being here if he's playing like that. So he's sort of in that a little bit of in-between mode. Like he's not quite cutting it in some ways at the NHL level. Now he comes here and he gets this big confidence boost. Hey, we had sort of a similar thing in some ways, I feel like 4 or 5 years ago when Travis Sanheim came down to us, like in February,
Yeah,
and he still actually had to continue to grow and develop since then. But this sort of reminds me of that, a guy that was expected to be at the NHL. Well, I don't know if we knew that Brink was going to make the Flyers.
Yeah, he had an amazing camp.
I
don't think that was the expectation.
But once he made it and he was doing so well, and then halfway through the season, nobody says, okay, is he really going to have to go back down because he stagnated some, he stalled out some. Travis Sanheim was sort of the same. Like he's a guy who's supposed to hang here.
Yeah.
And then they sent him back. Hexy back in the day sent him back. And then Sanheim, similarly, I think he put together like a 9-game point streak or something. He kind of thrived in his 3 weeks with us. I don't know if Brink is going to be here with us for 3 weeks, but NHL's on the All-Star break. We still have games coming up. So that whole combination, it does kind of make sense to keep Bobby here for however long. If he keeps this up, though, we're looking at him going, he doesn't belong here. Oh, wow. It really was impressive what he did, especially Friday. But then 2 goals Saturday kind of spoke for itself, too.
Yeah, another guy you mentioned, when we're talking about Bobby, and I actually wanted to bring him up as well, Wade Allison, just because he was a guy where, obviously he gets demoted at the start of the year. He gets waived, clears waivers, gets sent down. And Ian Laperrière, who can do this sometimes, can give away a little bit more information than you expect, more or less strongly implied that Wade was sulking a little bit at the beginning of the year, that he was struggling with the fact that he was demoted. Then I think it was like a few days or maybe a week later, he kind of backtracked. He said, I maybe went a little bit too far with those comments, further than I wanted to. But do you feel like now that Wade has kind of accepted and embraced where he's at now? Obviously, he wants to be up in the NHL, but is that attitude still a problem?
No, I don't think so. And I don't know if it was that much of a problem necessarily at the beginning, But yes, I think he was a little frustrated, but in a way, I mean, you don't want to be happy to be here either. A guy that is expected to be at the NHL level, but he didn't play as well at the start, and we're kind of wondering, well, what's happening with Wade. Now, more recently, he missed the last 5 games with an injury before he came back Saturday. He took some weird hit in a game on January 12th, and he left kind of hobbling and looked like it was a knee thing, maybe, because he was kind of pointing to that. It wasn't too serious, obviously. He came back a couple of weeks later, but no, he fights and competes for his guys here. Upstairs in the press box, when he's a scratch, and I noticed this 2 years ago, the scratched and injured guys, they sit one booth over from me. I'm not over there staring at them all the time, but they're usually just chilling and watching the game. Wade, 2 years ago, and I even told him this, I saw him, he gets up. If the Phantoms score a goal with 2 minutes left to tie it, he's standing and he's an emotional guy, and he's pumped. I've never seen players up there act like that. And he was actually doing it the other night, his last game out with an injury, Friday. The Phantoms were down 3-0, and they came back to tie it, and he was into it. So if that doesn't tell you something about his buy-in and compete level for this team here, this group of guys, which Bobby Brink referenced as well, it's a good group of guys here. He knows a lot of the guys, our captain Garrett Wilson and Belpedio and players like that. Then I don't know what will, because when you get down here, yeah, sure, it's a little bit of a disappointment when it happens. But when you get out there in the game, you want to play well and you want to win. And I mean, it's just the competitive juices get flowing. It's hard to just sort of coast through an entire hockey game like that. So I think, Wade's okay. And I think now, I don't know what the plans are for him with the Flyers in the future, but if he's going to be looked at by other teams as well, and I think that he probably has an awareness of this. He's not just playing for Danny Briere and the Flyers, but for his future also, more or less playing for 31 other teams to show them that he can still do it. Obviously, nobody claimed him off of waivers, so that's quite a statement there. I thought he would get claimed.
Yeah, I thought so too.
It's early in the year, so you don't have a whole lot of injuries, and different teams don't have spots to fill, and you have your own guys. But I thought somewhere there's got to be a team that wants to take a shot on him because of what he is capable of doing and what we all know he can do. But so I think Wade's okay. I thought he played very well, especially since he hadn't played in 3 weeks or whatever it was. And he scored a goal that tied it in the third against the Toronto Marlies, and he was absolutely pumped up when Brink and they got a 5. They were down by 2. They had a 5-on-3 early in the third, and then Brink and Allison scored back to back, 5-on-3 and then 5-on-4, pretty much from the same spot over in the left circle. Allison's was a little bit on the rush, and it was a gorgeous shot, and it was his first goal in a month. He hadn't scored for a couple of weeks before his injury, so he knows that. But boy, when he gets that one goal, now they can start to snowball for him, and it wouldn't surprise me if Wade keeps it up and ends up having a big week out of this. That would be really good, and I'm kind of waiting for him to really get rolling. He's come that close a couple of times, and then kind of then they weren't coming for him as much. Part of that's where the team had a little bit of a lag as well.
Gotcha. Okay, changing gears for a little bit. Want to talk to you about the defensemen. I know I'm going to focus specifically on Emil Andrae and Ronnie Attard. I know Helge Grans is another quality prospect. He was out for a while with injury, so that's a big part of why his season maybe hasn't gone necessarily the way he's wanted it to. But with Andrae and Attard, these are two guys where if you look at their numbers just in isolation, you would say, man, they're playing really well. Particularly, Andrae has 22 points in 31 games. Attard's on pace for more goals and points than he did last year. But I get the sense that there isn't a ton of urgency on the part of the Flyers to move these guys up to the NHL level. So I guess I'm curious as to whether their all-around games doesn't quite match up with the raw point totals and the numbers, or if it's more just the case that the Flyers defense core is pretty backlogged already, and they're just kind of figure, well, it's not going to hurt them to play more at the AHL level.
Yeah, kind of all of the above, sort of. I'm more along the lines of I don't know if the Flyers even care that much about their point totals. For a defenseman especially. Andrae is going to get points on the power play, and that's distributing to other, and he's terrific to watch on the power play. Really exciting, and some of the keeps that he has on the blue line are just phenomenal. And he's terrific at quarterback in the power play, which, by the way, is one of the best in the league. Andrae is a big part of that, but also he's got some other players around him that are also really good. And for Ronnie Attard, the focus on the points is something that had been addressed even going back to last year. And Lappy has talked about this, quite a bit. I don't want him thinking about the points. I've taken him off of our second power play because of that. We want him to focus on defense. And so Attard, I think, is quietly, and that's what they want. They want him to be more of a quiet player. Go back, kill the play. That's your job, to almost not be noticed. Now they're actually putting him back on that second power play unit. He's in the left circle, and that's his one-timer side. So they put him up there, and Ethan Sampson quarterbacks that power play. So Attard doesn't quarterback the power play. He spent more time off of the power play than on. Will he be part of a power play at the NHL level, I think, is sort of that question. Like, that might not be your thing anyway.
Right.
But the defensive strides that he's making and making the smarter plays and distributing the puck. Now, with Emil Andrae, they're still talking about wanting him to play and decide faster. And that's what Torts had said back in November when they sent him down. That's what Andrae said about himself, and he's more self-critical than any other player I think that I've talked to is Emil Andrae. And Lappy said that more recently as well. And he has some good games and then some good plays, but then they get caught a little bit on their own end, and that happened in Friday's game. The Phantoms were down 3-0 against the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. Scored twice in the second. Brink had one of those. And then once in the third, J.R. Avon set up Adam Brooks, and they tied it, and they were on the verge of winning and just killing the Pens. And the shots in the third were 17-4, but the Penguins won it with a minute and a half left. And it was some lost coverage defensively on just a casual dump in, but Grans and Andrae and Avon were back there. Now, Lappy just says our rookies made some rookie mistakes, but I can look on the video. I know who was there. And we had two guys going into the corner and nobody out in front. And that was a a learning moment mistake. You know, that's
Right.
what the AHL is. When you make a mistake, okay, that's a teaching moment here, and we don't want to harp on the negative too much, but also we do need to learn from the mistakes that we make. And so I see a play like that, it stung. And I know that Andre probably couldn't stop thinking about it after that. But there have been some plays in there where you go, ugh. And then some other plays where Andre just really stands out because of his skill set and how good he is. So there's been some, you know, and you're going to have some ups and downs because you're trying to figure out, and this is what it's about. Get the big minutes down here, Andre, Brink, whoever, get the big minutes out here, and that helps you get the reps to figure it out. But in that process of figuring it out 1 week after another, there are going to be some bumps along the road. And, you know, teams are coming at you with a new forecheck that you haven't seen before, and maybe a little more aggressive. And all right, are you going to be able to handle it and have the support there? Are you going to provide the support? Are you going to panic? And so doing that over and over again, that kind of alleviates the panic on just finding an exit and really simple things like that, you know, and so that it's not about the points. It's about finding the exits. It's about coverage and knowing who's supposed to go in the middle and who's going into the corner and all of those things defensively that they need to thrive at. I feel like Attard's getting there, and Andre, you know, gets some bumps in the road along the way, you know, makes a misplay, and then he's great sometimes. So, but at the NHL level, if you do something like that, Tort's reaction is going to be a little different than what Lappy's reaction is here. Lappy says that all the time, like, hey, you can get away with that here. Up there, you know who the head coach is, you know, maybe sometimes not so much. You know, they're not going to stand for that.
Very, very fair. One other guy I wanted to ask you about, and then I want to just get into a general question to close it out. One guy who, going into camp, was, I think, viewed as a dark horse to make the team. I know Ian Laperrière during rookie camp very much was talking him up as a guy like that, was Elliot Desnoyers. Lappy last year loved his play. You know, he relied on him as basically the first-line center, all situations kind of guy. This year, he has just 14 points in 36 games. So I guess I'm curious, what explains the drop-off? Has there been something missing from his game? Is it just puck luck? What's going on with him?
It's hard to say. And I've been talking, and we've had a lot of conversations about this. More like a second-line center last year, by the way. And Anisimov was our top-line guy,
Right.
but, you know, whatever, you know, same diff. But I mean, it feels like a sophomore slump, you know, and I think he knows it. He's such a cerebral player. He's so smart, and, you know, he's just, sometimes the line combos haven't been exactly the same for him. I don't know. I mean, I'm a little surprised as well. 23 goals last year, which was a Lehigh Valley record, most goals by a rookie. This year he has 4, and we're past the midway mark. It's not just about the goals for him, though. But yes, that obviously sticks out. Did he have more puck luck than maybe was warranted last year with setups from his teammates? I don't know. They want him to continue. He's not going to be a 30-goal guy at the NHL level, though. So, I mean, does it really matter that much? I think it's also fair to ask that. But is he doing the right things out there consistently for the type of player that they want him to be? And I think more often than not, the answer is yes. He's doing a lot better on faceoffs this year, and that's something that, you know, because he hadn't been a center before, he's really worked on that. Now I see him out there, and every other time I look up, he's winning one of those clean, you know, not even with a little support. And that's great to see, you know, and his positioning and his smarts, he's in the right places and he's doing the right things, and the goals still aren't coming. I don't know why exactly, but, and then there was some discussion as well about whether, you know, he came in last year, nobody really knew what he was, and now teams can, you know, kind of solve him some and key on him, and he's no secret anymore. Is that part of it? You know, maybe somewhat too. But, you know, and Lappy has talked about this as well. Hey, second year, you know, guys go into a slump. It happened to me when I was, you know, getting my career started. It happens to a lot of guys. And, you know, Desnoyers just needs to keep on pushing and fighting through it. Samu, to me, also needs to keep pushing and fighting through it, even though he gets an occasional point. But this is a longer season and a longer grind and more games per week than some of those guys are used to. Desi's used to it. he had the injury stuff a couple years ago, but for the most part, he's used to playing that many games. But for some players like Brink and Tuamala coming out of college hockey or European hockey, they don't play this many games. And they've already, we're at 40 games now for the Phantoms. This would almost be the end of their season, but stretched out over 6 months. That's a big difference maker too, because your legs are sore and it's like, okay, this week we got games Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. We're still going. We're still pushing and pumping, and we got some 3-3s coming up too, which we do in the AHL. It is a hard grind of a league. So for guys, when they take little steps back, that can happen. Dental AA, I think guys get tired and get bumped and bruised too. That it might, maybe doesn't have as much of an impact for the newness on him, but it is a grind of a season. I see him working. I see him still pushing forward. He knows what his season has been. I think he's been okay this year, even though the numbers don't show it. But he's doing more, so many of the right things. I feel like they're okay with him. But sure, yeah, there's some disappointment that all the way back to the rookie series in September.
Yeah.
He wasn't exactly impressing. And I was looking at that game in Forster too. And I'm like, well, these guys should show up and dominate. Well, I know it's September. And Desi did all the right things in the summer too. He was staying in Voorhees and working out all the time. So it's not like he showed up to camp out of shape or anything like that, or had, put it together the last month before camp. And a lot of guys get out of town. The guys that stay in town, like Louis Belpedio, giving himself a shot to actually get back up to the NHL level. Desi was doing that as well. But, let's also not forget that, he's also a kid still too. He just turned 22. So, the ups and downs, sure. But I absolutely was with you. I thought that he was going to have a chance to push for a spot on the opening night roster. And when he came down here, I thought he'd be doing pretty good. And, 23 goals last year, just pick up where you left off and keep it up. But instead, it has been a little bit of a turn the other direction in some ways for Desi. But the fact is, since he's still doing so many things well, I do think they're comfortable with the path that he's on still.
Got it. Okay, this is the last question. This is more of an open-ended one. There's always guys, who, for people who watch the Phantoms on a daily basis, there's guys that the real prospect people, the people who are focused on the big names, they don't even think about. But if you had to point out one guy, I guess preferably a prospect, but it could be an AHL veteran who has been a pleasant surprise, who's exceeded expectations and maybe has put himself on the radar in the way that like a Louis Belpedio did, with the fact that he then became a guy who spent a decent amount of time at the NHL level. Like, if there's one guy you had to point out who people might not know but maybe should know, who would it be?
I think John Randall Avon has a pretty bright future. He has 7 goals for us. And I mean, he's a rookie. He's 20 years old. But he is such a smart player and knows what he's doing, and he can just fly. And on Saturday, it was on the power play, and he took a little drop from Sampson way back in his own end, like on the faceoff dot. And he's just zipping right up there through all 4 Penguins penalty killers. So it was Friday's game. And past all 3 lines, all the way in deep, little left of the cage and past the line, and then just leaves it for Adam Brooks for a slam dunk. And J.R. Avon has very much impressed. And I think Lappy had an idea maybe of what he could be, but J.R. had that injury in training camp. So he practiced with us for a couple of weeks, but didn't play until October 25th or something like that. And then, it's give him a couple games to kind of get going. And once he did, he's very quickly solidified himself in the lineup. He's not a guy, one of those prospects that's rotating in and out of the lineup. He earns his keep. And there are some comparisons with really young rookies playing 200-foot games and needing to learn what they need to do to succeed at this level. And another 20-year-old who was actually 19 was Alexei Gendron. And he couldn't cut it at the 200-foot game and was making some mistakes out there. He's just so young, and he was barely eligible to play for us by 2 days because of his birthday on December 30th. So he's 19 years old. They send him back to major juniors. He in some ways, a little bit reminded me of Samu Tuamala, just kind of, the skill set is there, but he's also a little lost out there and not doing enough right things away from the puck. JR does so many right things away from the puck and supporting his line mates that he's very noticeable. And I think he's very much impressed this year. And I because he's undrafted, partly because the Ontario Hockey League didn't play that season in his draft year. He would have been drafted, but nobody took a chance on him because they weren't able to see him all year long. So you don't know what he is. Flyers got a little lucky. They said, let's bring him to camp, see what he is. And he chose to come to the Flyers. I'm guessing there had to be some other teams maybe offering invites who had some amount of interest, but the Flyers, spoke to him and he said, yeah, I like it here too. JR told me that, I think it was he had the development camp in the summer and then the rookie camp in September. And this was a couple years ago. And when they called him in September, he thought they were going to let him go and send him back home. Well, it was a good run while I had it. Maybe I'll get another chance. And they called him in and said, we'd like to sign you to an entry-level contract. And he was thrilled. But at first he was like, well, I guess that's it. That's how it goes. I very much feel like he's an NHL player. He's going to be. So I would very much keep an eye on him.
Sounds good. Well, Bob, thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure our listeners and viewers, I guess, we are still a video show as well. I'm sure they'll love to hear these updates on the Phantoms going into the second half. So thanks again for joining us.
Charlie, my pleasure. Good to talk.
We all silly like the mayor.